I was raised on 80s movies. Maybe I was raised by 80s movies. There was Gremlins, Back to the Future, RoboCop, Ghostbusters. There was one 80s movie that always stuck out as a realistic goal. That was National Lampoon's Vacation. I'd never be a cyborg or travel back in time, but I could drive across the freaking country, stopping at different roadside attractions, sleeping in weird hotels. I could end the trip at Wally World in California. Later on, I learned that Wally World wasn't exactly real, but Disneyland was. It'd be a more than suitable stand-in. I may not have understood all the jokes and one-liners that came from Clark's 2-week cross-country vacation with his family in tow, but understood there's got to be something special to hitting the highway and seeing what's out there. But then life hits you. You grow up, and you start working, you find that affording a trip like that is about as realistic as becoming RoboCop or saving New York City from a giant marshmallow. There's college and jobs and pets and houses and every other responsibility that comes along with being an adult. Driving from one end of the country to the other was just about as make-believe as any other story. It just wasn't happening. Flash forward 40 years after Clark's famous road trip. I was 43 now. For what it's worth, Chevy Chase hadn't even turned 40 when Vacation first came out. I was happy enough with my life. I'd long ago come to terms with my non-cross-country trip existence, and that was okay. I had 2 good kids, a decent job, more than a decent house. I was content. Content leads to comfort. As great as that sounds, life's got a way of rearing up and kicking you down when you get comfortable. That's exactly what happened when I got a call at work letting me know my mom was in the hospital. I saw my mom all the time. She lives right next door to me. Often I'd be reading a book on my front porch just to look over and see her doing the same on her porch. We'd each read for a while, then I'd walk over and visit. She never seemed bothered to put down her book and stop reading. She had health problems though. She'd had them for a few months. She always overcame whatever was wrong. This felt like it'd be no different, but I left work and headed to the hospital to see her. She seemed okay at first, but the more she talked, the more I could tell this was a little different than the other times she'd been in the hospital. She could speak well, but some of the words didn't make sense. Turns out she'd had a stroke, but I kept telling myself that people have those all the time. They do. People pull out of strokes, and they're okay. It had to help that she got to the hospital right away. She even walked in the freaking hospital unassisted. She'd be okay. She was always okay. But she was not okay. There wouldn't be another chance to be okay either. This isn't the time for the full story, but 24 hours later, I was telling the nurse to go ahead and turn off life support. 10 more minutes and she was gone. I'd watched her take her last breath, and that's something I'll never get over. After my mom died, I was freaking lost. I don't know what to do when this happens. It feels like everybody goes on with their lives somehow. It looked simple for everybody else too, but it didn't feel so simple. I had to go through everything that was her freaking life. I didn't have to do it alone, thankfully, but it still felt like I was alone. One thing I figured out was that she owned some land, some businesses too. It was property that I had no idea about, but also had no need for myself. A more rational person might have used it for something smart, but I wanted to be done with it, so it was easy to convince myself to sell it. I was able to turn it into a pretty good chunk of change, more than I'd ever had in my life at this point. I paid some bills, stashed some away for a rainy day, and held a little for myself. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do, but I kept enough in an envelope in my desk for whatever therapy I'd end up needing. There's only so much time that can pass after hitting the cold hard floor of depression before you either blow your freaking brains out or you adapt. Thankfully, I adapted and at least hit the pause button on splattering my brains on the ceiling. I reverted back to anything nostalgic. I no longer listened to any new music, stopped watching new movies, put down new books. I was only listening to music from my past, only watching movies from my childhood, and to be honest, I wasn't reading anything at all. I was moving backwards, but I guess that's better than not moving anywhere. I hibernated at home, played lots of Super Nintendo on one TV, had another TV going with DVDs of movies that took me back to a time when nothing mattered, back before I'd told an old lady to go ahead and pull the plug on my mom. There's only so much Star Wars, Star Trek, and Stargate that you can watch before you come back down to earth and drag out some comedies. I may not have been feeling very much fun, but I had held hope that old favorites like David Spade, Eddie Murphy, and Chevy Chase might help lighten the mood. Seeing Clark Griswold show his family their travel route on an old Atari-looking computer actually got me a little excited too. I started thinking maybe this could be real life. Kept staring at that envelope stuffed with blood money, connecting the dots in my head. The Grand Canyon looked freaking awesome when Clark and Ellen gave it a quick look. Google told me it's 28 freaking hours from my house. 28 hours. Seems like a lifetime. Looking further, Disneyland is 33 hours. It felt like it was on the other side of the world. For the first time, it was within reach. So what else could I do besides the Grand Canyon and Disneyland? Griswolds really didn't make that many stops. They did Dodge City, but I didn't want to stop there. Clark mentioned the second largest ball of twine, but they didn't go see it. I don't even know if that's real. I had to get away from the John Hughes masterpiece and see what the internet could show me. I was able to find list after list of all kinds of weird attractions, museums, statues, just unique sites. Things were starting to take shape, and all the planning had taken my mind off the gun and the bullets I'd hidden away. Okay, so now I've got a list of sites for the trip. I actually have a whole freaking notebook with stops broken down by each state. I've got no idea if I have too many stops or if there's not enough, but it feels like I've got a good start. Fast forward a few more weeks, I've got the dates off work, a whole freaking month. Plus I've got a rental car lined up. Thought it was the best to put all those miles on somebody else's car when it wasn't mine. So I rented a small SUV. Should be pretty good on gas and give us plenty of room. I've decided I'll just take my son, Charlie, on this trip. My daughter, Claire, she can barely stand to be in the car with me for more than 10 minutes. I can't imagine how miserable she'd be if she were stuck with me for a month. So it'll be me and a 16-year-old figuring this out together. You remember the beginning of National Lampoon's Vacation? Clark and Rusty go out to pick up the Antarctic Blue Super Sports wagon with a CB and optional rally fun pack, but instead he got the Wagon Queen family truckster in metallic P. Well, that sort of thing does actually happen in real life, just with a little less flair. So in the rental car, I'd chosen Nissan Rogue. There was fine print that also read, or similar. That should be easy enough to drive all over God's green earth and be comfortable enough for Charlie, my son, and I. It was anything but luxurious, but it was nice enough to ride, keep me from dreading a month as a rubber tramp. I woke up early. It was supposed to be the first day of this journey. I was itching to get going. I was supposed to pick up the rental as soon as the place opened for the day. Everything we were taking was packed and ready to go. Suitcases full of clothes, a cooler full of junk food, drinks that had way too much caffeine. All I needed now was to get the freaking car, take it home, throw all this crap inside, and hit the road. In my head, that was pretty simple and stress-free, but I was wrong. I got out of the shower to see a missed call on my phone with a voicemail waiting to be heard. Listening, I heard the guy at the rental place let me know they had a car for me, but they were running a little behind, needed to drop it off for an oil change. It should be no later than 11 this morning. That was the empty promise anyway. But I could deal with that. I still had 4 weeks, plenty of freaking time to get everything in and make it to Disneyland as the main event. It was a bummer, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was just going to set me behind a few hours. I talked myself into staying in a good mood, saw it as a good excuse to spend a few hours with Claire, my daughter, who I wouldn't see for several weeks once we got going. 11 o'clock rolled around and I still hadn't received a call back about the car. Around 11:15, I started impatiently calling them, but I got no answer. Time after time, the same result. It rang and rang until finally I got a voice recording saying that everybody was busy and to try back later. That wasn't really helping my mood. When the clock finally hit noon, I had Charlie drive me to the rental office to check things out myself. The rental company's lot was pretty empty. There were a few vehicles in the employee spots and a couple tiny cars scattered around the rental parking area, but I was too naive to feel uneasy. I thought maybe they had my Rogue around back, was all gassed up, ready for me to sign my name and get the keys. I hadn't even left yet, and I was already wrong for the second time on this trip. I was annoyed at not receiving a call that the car was ready, but I couldn't take too much fuss once I got inside. There was only one dude in the building, despite multiple cars in the employee spots outside. The guy looked flustered and stressed. He also had his kid sitting in the corner, playing a game on her iPad. Couldn't yell at the dude in front of his kid, so I kept my cool, remained level-headed. He did apologize and admitted he had been so covered up he hadn't been able to call yet. On the bright side, my car was ready. He handed me a couple of key fobs and had me follow him outside. I hadn't even noticed that the fobs had Jeep written on them, big silver letters. He was excited as he talked up how cool the car was. I was still expecting the same car that my mom used to drive. It was something I was fine with, not exactly something I considered super cool. It still hadn't registered in my brain that something was off, even when he stopped at this huge freaking lifted Jeep Wrangler. And then he opened the door so I could look inside. "What do you think about driving a Jeep?" he asked. I was really trying to be nice. I told him it was cool, but asked if there was anything else. Remember earlier when I said that the whole bit where Clark gets the wrong car can actually happen in real life? Well, this is what I was talking about. Granted, the Jeep did look awesome. The dude wasn't wrong, it was cool. I had to jump up to get inside. It had huge freaking tires that were meant for mud holes and rivers. The problem was that I needed tires for the interstate, not off-roading. I wasn't preparing to go on an expedition to Everest. I was going to freaking Disneyland. I was aggravated, but I bit my lip and rolled over. I was already late hitting the road, and I could clearly see that there wasn't anything else available other than a few giant 15-passenger vans. I didn't think those could possibly be any better than this Jeep, so I signed on the dotted line, opted out of their insurance. That part will come back to bite me later. And I left in this combat assault vehicle. At least I was finally going to get this trip started. By 1 o'clock, I'd already made it back home, the second coming of the family truckster. Packed it full of everything two hillbillies would need to survive California, and we were on the highway. I had Memphis punched in as the first destination. Since we were several hours behind, we wouldn't make it there until late, but it would be a good stop for the night anyway, and we could start the next day by checking out a few things around Memphis. Memphis has some pretty cool stuff, or at least stuff that looked cool to me when I was planning this trip. We got up early to finally get some stops in, besides just gas and bathroom visits. First, there was the Crystal Shrine Grotto. It's this weird concrete cave in the middle of a cemetery. It was built almost 100 years ago. Inside, there's artwork and sculptures telling different Bible stories. It felt like walking onto the set of a silent film era Indiana Jones movie. Next, we paid a visit to the Lorraine Motel. That's where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. Outside, there's old cars, and there's a wreath hanging at the spot where King stood at the time when he was shot. These days, it's no longer a motel. It's a museum. It's definitely worth stopping when you're in Memphis. Everything was really going well so far, but there was one more stop I wanted to make before we got back on the interstate: the Memphis Pyramid. It was built as a huge arena where the Memphis Grizzlies played basketball. I'm pretty sure it's been used as a soundstage for a movie and was even the site of a couple Mike Tyson fights. But these days, it's a mecca for rednecks as the largest Bass Pro Shop in the world. I haven't been fishing in years, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to visit a giant pyramid with a pond inside. It did look pretty friggin' awesome from the outside. Here's this huge pyramid made out of glass and metal. It's right in Tennessee. There's a bowling alley inside, a restaurant, even a friggin' hotel. And we just walked around, we took it all in before we headed back out to the monstrosity of a Jeep that was waiting for us in the parking lot. As soon as we walked out of the pyramid, we were greeted by this friendly bald-headed dude wearing orange robes and a huge smile. He had a long beaded necklace hanging all the way down to his waist and a leather bag that hung from his shoulder. He walked up and handed Charlie and I each a bracelet. It was a cheap plastic bracelet that was made to look like wood, with a plastic Buddha attached at the center. Now, Buddha isn't my thing, but it was weird and looked cool, so I thanked the dude and started to walk away. Then, this man grabbed my freaking arm, all while still smiling this warm smile. "Donation?" he asked, while still holding on to that smile. Alright, I don't mind to give the friendly dude a couple bucks for this dollar store bracelet. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. "More?" he said, as he still smiled and held my arm. Well, things were getting a little awkward now, but I didn't want to be a jerk, so I pulled out my wallet and passed him a $10 bill. 10 frickin' bucks for these bracelets. He was still smiling as he gestured for another. It was getting more and more uncomfortable at this point. I think I'm being held up by this little dude. No wonder he's smiling. He's out here ripping people off. "How much?" I asked, getting a little nervous. "All," he said as he nodded towards my wallet. So far, everything seemed to harken back to National Lampoon's Vacation. This was straight out of the scene where Clark gets held up by the mechanics who fix up the family truckster somewhere outside of Monument Valley. At least this guy wasn't also the sheriff of Memphis, as far as I knew. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of the big pyramid, but also didn't want to give this guy any more money for his cheap trinkets. The problem is that I'm not going to fight the guy. Heck, he'd probably win anyway. At least he hadn't threatened me with a wrench yet. Thankfully, most of my cash was stashed away in the luggage in the Jeep. All I had left in my wallet was a 20. It turned my stomach a little, but I was ready to get away from this Mortal Kombat looking dude and get out of Memphis, so I handed it over. He finally let go of my arm, bowed politely, flashed his smile one last time before he turned away to chase down an older couple who had just walked outside. Hopefully they weren't falling for a scam like I did. The moral of that story is just to avoid these little monk dudes at all costs. They're phonies. At least I can get back on the interstate, even if my wallet is lighter than it should be. It's late, but I can get a few hours down the road before stopping for the night. Our next destination is close to 6 hours away, but I can knock part of that drive out tonight before finding a roach motel for some sleep. I remember being on a trip to Houston with my dad. This was probably around 1990 or so. We went through Louisiana, we stopped in New Orleans. It was cool, but that was my only experience with the Creole state. But I had other plans for Charlie and I. Gibbsland is a small town in northern Louisiana. It's famous for being the spot where Bonnie and Clyde were gunned down, ending their infamous crime spree, and that's where we're headed. There's a spot in town that used to be a restaurant. It's called Ma Canfield's Cafe. And Bonnie and Clyde were passing through. They stopped there at Ma Canfield's around 9 a.m. This was on May 23rd in 1934. They got a bite to eat, and then headed out of town where a posse of lawmen were waiting for them about 7 miles down the road. That's where they were gunned down while they were still driving. Ma Canfield's Cafe is now the Bonnie and Clyde Ambush Museum. It's a treasure trove of memorabilia from their spree. The museum's got pictures, newspapers. They've even got the bullet-riddled clothes that the duo were wearing when the run came to an end. Just about everything is in here except for the real car. There's even a cat roaming around the place. You know it's a roadside treasure when there's a cat calling the place home. We made it to Gibbsland in the morning since we'd done half the driving from Memphis the night before. The museum hadn't opened yet, so we headed out to the ambush site. It was only about a 10-minute drive, but I had to kill an hour before we could come back and check out the museum, so we went ahead and drove on over. It feels like being in the middle of nowhere. I guess it kinda is. It's just down a small road, though the road is at least paved. There's 2 monuments down here, surrounded by mud and gravel, right by the road. One monument looks a little newer, a little more official. That one is dedicated to the law officers who were part of the ambush. The other monument almost looks homemade. It's gouged and dented. Looks like it's been hit with everything from hammers to bullets. And I think it has. The damage seems fitting though. It does make it look like the cooler of the 2 monuments. It's pretty cool to be here, in this random spot in Louisiana. Imagining what it would have been like to have been in the same spot almost a century ago when a 1930s Ford came barreling down this road. I'm sure it would have been a dirt road all that time ago. Probably would have felt even more remote back then. The sound of all that gunfire would have been intense. There were 112 freaking bullet holes in the car alone. I've got to imagine even more bullets were fired that didn't hit the target. Now it's silent out here. Not even a single car came down this road while we were snapping pictures and taking it all in. It didn't feel like it took too long at all for an hour to pass the ambush site, so we headed back into town to visit the museum. It's completely worth a visit. There is a car here. It's not the exact Ford, but it's one just like the one that Bonnie and Clyde were driving. There's so many photographs, some taken by the fugitives themselves. There's even pictures of the bodies after the ambush if you want to see that kind of thing. The history represented inside the ambush museum, it is a bit grisly, but it's an important part of Americana. I don't want to glamorize Bonnie and Clyde, not at all. Their story was freaking interesting. They weren't heroes, they were scumbags. They went on a 2-year crime spree, robbing banks and murdering people along the way. In all, they killed 12 people. That fact can't be whitewashed. And from one crazy piece of history to another. Finishing up in Gibbsland, combined with the fact that it was still morning, meant that we should have time to make one more stop today at another place rooted in sinister history, Waco, Texas. If you're like me and you grew up in the 90s, you remember all about David Koresh. He was leader of the Branch Davidians, a cult founded in 1955, 4 years before Koresh was even born. Koresh led many of his followers to their end just outside of Waco in 1993. Their compound, known as the Mount Carmel Center, was the site of a shootout between several groups of law enforcement and the cult members that lasted for 51 freaking days, saw 86 people killed. I was 12 years old when the wacko in Waco was plastered all over the news. I wasn't quite old enough to understand exactly what was going on, but I could tell just how important it was. There was no way back then to escape news of what was going on near Waco. I didn't know what, if anything, was even still out there, but I wanted to get as close as possible to where the site once existed. Oddly enough, Mount Carmel compound showed up as a destination in Google Maps, so it was easy to find. We showed up early in the evening, but there was still plenty of sunlight left in the day. You have to go down a long dirt road, so the combat jeep was filthy by the time we got there, but it was built for a lot worse than this. We turned off the main road, came to an open gate, and another dirt road here too. There wasn't exactly a welcome sign on this gate, but there also wasn't anything saying we should turn around, so we drove on through. There were a few trailers on this road, but I could see the church up at the top of the hill. We continued on. It looked to be about 200 yards up to that church, which I was assuming was the spot of the Mount Carmel Center. There were a couple trailers that we drove by, a few people outside one of them. They just waved and went on about their business, which really helped ease my nerves. I was getting kind of tense, and up until that point, I wasn't sure if we were welcome here or not. I stopped by a small marker near the church so we could get out and explore. The marker looked just like a gravestone. It was dedicated to the members of the ATF who died here. The ATF executed a search warrant on February 28, 1993. That's the event that kicked off the 51-day siege and cost the lives of 4 ATF agents. Beyond the ATF memorial, we checked out the church. The door was locked, but there was a sign outside welcoming to the Branch, which seemed to be the new church group that sprang up from the ashes of the Branch Davidians. Beside the church is where true signs of the past can be seen. There's concrete on the ground, it's all cracked and buckled. That's where the original compound stood. The hole in the concrete is marked by a small sign informing us that this is the location where mothers and children perished. It's a haunting thought. It gives a lightheaded feeling just to be standing here, peering into this vault. There's more concrete, marking other buildings that made up Mount Carmel. The church covers some of this, but others can be walked on, tracing the footsteps where the psycho David Koresh himself once walked. Walking a little further leads to a large concrete swimming pool. Originally, this is where the Branch Davidians would have swam for fun when David allowed it. Now it's half full of murky water with a foul smell. That doesn't mean the pool is completely lifeless though. There are a few tiny fish in the water and a handful of flowers have burst through a crack in the side of the pool. It's too hard to get beyond the past to feel serenity here, but you could almost feel this being a pretty place in another lifetime. There's a path that leads down away from the pool, down to a flooded bunker that was destroyed all that time ago. It doesn't take much of an imagination to hear the chaos that occurred here. Part of the bunker included an underground school bus, buried under orders from David Koresh to be used as an escape shelter. That bus was crushed by a tank, cutting off an escape route that might have saved several lives. It's hard not to break just by standing here. One final path took us down to another memorial. This one was in honor of the Branch Davidians themselves, the ones who lost their lives here. Name after name recorded in memory of those who trusted Koresh to the very end, including many children. Some of those were fathered by David himself. His name is also included in the memorial, though he wasn't listed as the man he was remembered to be. The memorial is marked with his birth name, Vernon Wayne Howe. David Koresh was so full of lies, even his name was fiction. As important as it felt to come to Waco, I was relieved that we'd seen all there was to see. That meant we could leave this tragedy behind and head for Dallas, leaving one tragedy behind for another, but I couldn't go through North Texas and not make a stop in Dallas. Dallas is less than 2 hours from Waco, but the sun was already going down, so I decided to get a room in Waco and get out of town first thing in the morning. I might as well get gas too. I can fill the Jeep up tonight, be ready to ride right on into Dallas in the morning. I pulled into one of those random no-name gas stations. I prefer the big truck stop gas stations like Love's or Flying J. Those are usually fairly clean. They've usually got some kind of hot food, and they do a pretty decent job at keeping away most of the backpack-wearing drug peddlers that frequent my own small town. This wasn't Love's. Heck, it wasn't even Come and Go. The only sign this place had was dimly lit and said gas. That'll do for now. I can fill up and find a nearby hotel on my phone while we're stopped. While I was filling up, Charlie walked inside to use the bathroom. There was an old lady sitting on a bench right outside the door of the gas station. She was somewhere between 45 and 90, probably leaning more towards 90. The wrinkles on her face were so deep that I guess she probably kept her cigarettes in one of them. I saw her say something to Charlie as he walked by, but I was too far away to tell what she said. He totally ignored her like he does everyone else anyway, so I couldn't judge anything by his face, but I didn't think too much of it. I finished pumping gas and got back in the Jeep. Charlie came out of the gas station just a few minutes later. This time, the old woman got up with the help of a cane. Even though he's well over twice her size, she grabbed his arm and he froze. I wasn't sure if she was trying to pull some joke or if she really was crazy, but I pulled the Jeep away from the gas pumps and drove closer to Charlie over at the front of the station. She was still holding his arm. He would have easily been able to pull away from her, but he was too polite no matter what the circumstance was. My window was down. I could hear her saying that she's going to take him home with her. I still couldn't really tell if she was joking, but even if she was, it was already to the point of being uncomfortable. I spoke back from inside the Jeep, sort of half joking, but also half concerned, letting her know that I better get him back home with me or I might get in trouble. She let go of his arm and raised her cane. This definitely wasn't a joke, and at this point I'm realizing that definitely isn't a cane. It's a really long crowbar. Thankfully, Charlie had enough thought to get back in the Jeep when she let go of his arm. I locked the doors, rolled my window up, started backing up when she hurled that freaking crowbar like a drunken javelin thrower. Thankfully, she didn't have enough strength for it to become a missile, but it still hit the windshield, took a nice chunk of glass along with it. The crowbar slid down the hood as we sped away from the gas station, taking a thin line of paint off as the gas station disappeared in the rearview mirror. After all that, I might as well drive to Dallas tonight. Wasn't going to fall asleep anytime soon anyway. I didn't get much sleep last night. I'm pretty sure Charlie didn't either. That crazy lady had us both torn up for a while. I wasn't feeling super great about the windshield either. I'd only made it to day 4 and was already regretting my choice to opt out of the rental company's insurance. I had no clue what kind of headache this would cause, but I tried telling myself it could be worse. We stayed in a halfway decent hotel just outside of Dallas. When the sun came up, I went out to get a good look at the damage in the daylight. The hood had a deep scratch where the crowbar had slid down the Jeep. That was ugly, but wasn't going to ruin any drive. The real problem was the windshield. There was a large chip of glass missing from the driver's side. It would be right in my line of sight when driving. A spider web of cracks spreaded from the chip, but most of those were tiny. Only 2 cracks really worried me. They were about 3 inches long. Still, I would be able to see out, so it's not going to stop the trip, but it sure was going to be a reminder of that old lady for the next several thousand miles until we dropped this thing back off at the rental place in Virginia. We got ready and drove downtown to Dealey Plaza. The event that happened here occurred before I was born, but it was still well known to me. There were multiple conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of JFK, 35th President of the United States. I'm still not really sure what story to believe, but the known fact is that Kennedy was in fact in the back of the car, riding through Dealey Plaza when somebody, probably Lee Harvey Oswald, basically blew his head off. It was still early in the morning, so things were relatively quiet surrounding the plaza. There were cars driving by, but nobody was out walking besides Charlie and I. At one corner stood the Texas School Book Depository Building, a building famous for being where Lee Harvey Oswald worked. The sixth floor of the building is where he made a sniper's nest and waited for the presidential motorcade on November 22, 1963. Just down from the school book depository is the infamous grassy knoll. It's a small hill that some believe was the site of a second shooter. There's a wooden fence at the top of the knoll where it's thought this mysterious other sniper was hiding. That fence is still there today. There's an X painted in the middle of the road to mark the spot where JFK was shot. Being this early and with very little traffic, we were able to stand on the X and take in the eerie quiet of an early morning in Dallas. The feeling wasn't quite as heavy as being at the Mount Carmel site the day before, but it was still easy to feel the importance of this small X in the road. It was a lot to take in, especially after what happened last night when leaving Waco. I didn't want this trip to completely revolve around so much evil, but we did have a few more stops to make in Dallas that linked back to our visit to Gibbsland a few days ago, the graves of Bonnie and Clyde. Both Bonnie and Clyde were from Dallas. Bonnie spent time here as a waitress. One of her regular customers went on to become a lawman and was part of the posse that gunned her down. She was raised here by her mother and had dreams of becoming an actress. Clyde was a petty criminal who ended up behind bars in Waco at one point. He committed his first murder while in prison and was said to have come out a changed man, but not in a good way. Someone who knew Clyde said that he changed from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake while in prison. When he was freed, he began his well-known crime spree with Bonnie and a handful of other criminals. Now, they're both buried in separate cemeteries in Dallas. Bonnie is in a nice cemetery, buried alongside her mother, while Clyde is in a rundown cemetery that I'm not even sure you're supposed to visit. He shares a grave with his brother, who is also in Clyde's gang. It's not that I want to make stop after stop revolving around tragedy, but who knows when I'll get the chance to come back through here. I have to take this advantage to see as much as I can, but now that I've seen these graves, I can get back on the road and get out of Dallas. It's still well before noon, but it's already hot out. The thermometer on the dash in the Jeep says it's pushing 100 degrees. There's one more place in Texas that I want to see, hot or not, so we head towards Amarillo. It's about a 6-hour drive from Dallas. I can make that while the sun is still out. I guess I could slow down and get to Amarillo in the morning, listening to the George Strait song as I pulled into town, but I'm not patient enough for that. So I'll head there this evening and eat at the famous Big Texan. As we drive off, my eyes go right back to that crack in the windshield. It looks like it's growing. I can't decide if it's my imagination, but I was remembering it being about half this size last night. I tell myself that I'm being paranoid, and we head northwest. Making a few stops after Dallas for gas and bathrooms put us in Amarillo around 7 p.m. It wasn't dark yet, so we headed out to something I'd seen online, Cadillac Ranch. It's a spot in the middle of a field where 10 Cadillacs are buried, hood first, in the ground. Cars have some age to them. They range from late 40s models up to the early 60s. They've been buried here since 1997. Before that, they spent 20 years buried a few miles away. Besides the fact that 10 old Cadillacs buried in the ground looks cool on its own, these cars are improved by being covered in graffiti. It's allowed, basically even encouraged, to add your own spray paint when visiting. It's like a Route 66 rite of passage. There were a few people here adding new paint as we pulled up along the dirt road. We parked behind an RV. I hated driving this Jeep, but at least it wasn't a giant tank like an RV. The Cadillacs are about 100 yards from the dirt road. It's impressive to see even from this distance. I like this kind of weird stuff, and this is a welcome sight after the other stops we've made over the last few days. You can smell the spray paint before you ever make it to the Cadillacs. The paint is on everything from the fence to the trash can by the gate, but it's concentrated on the cars. They're absolutely freaking covered with hundreds of layers. Looking at them up close, they look like they're more paint than car these days. It's as if the cars could melt into every color ever imagined. It's one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Charlie and I didn't bring our own spray paint, but there were cans of it laying here and there. We picked up a few until we found some that were still about half full and added our own names to the countless layers of paint. It probably wouldn't take long for someone to come behind us and add paint over our names, but it added to the vibe, thinking that our names would be forever safe underneath more and more paint here at Cadillac Ranch. We were checking out the cars and all that artwork when we heard a loud noise. It sounded like metal scraping against metal. I looked over towards the dirt road, towards where we'd parked the Jeep. The behemoth of an RV that we'd parked behind had pulled forward into a ditch before backing up and scraping the side of the Jeep. The driver of the RV either hasn't realized what's happened or he just doesn't freaking care. They're back on the road and leaving while Charlie and I are a full football field away. We make the walk back to the Jeep. The RV is long gone but left white paint down the passenger side. The vehicles must have just rubbed as there's not any dents in the Jeep, but the passenger side mirror is missing. Once again, I'm regretting my decision to ever leave the lot in this freaking Jeep. I've got no doubt the next time I'll be using their insurance, not my own. On the bright side, I can still drive this thing, so we head to the Big Texan Steak Ranch as the sun starts to set. The Big Texan is an Amarillo restaurant famous for their free 4.5-pound steak. But it's only free if you eat it in an hour. Otherwise, it's $72. We're not going to try for that, but I still want to check out the place and get some Texan food. It's just a short drive to the restaurant from the Cadillac Ranch. I'm completely convinced that this Texas heat has made the windshield crack grow. There's no doubt in my mind of that now, as the crack has grown to about a foot long. I talked myself into not worrying about that. The day is almost over and we're getting ready to eat some good food. We pull up to the Big Texan, a large yellow building with a neon cowboy for a sign. It looks perfectly Texan. There's a large bull statue out front and Texas flags flying all over the place. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. We walked in and were seated pretty quickly. After ordering mountain oysters and a couple of steaks, an old cowboy walks over to our table carrying a guitar. I'd seen him making his rounds, singing and playing at tables. It was cool when it was from a distance, but it was kind of annoying when he made it to our table. He asked if I had any requests, and I tried to politely tell him no thanks, but he wasn't one to give up easily. "I bet you don't even know any country songs," the old Willie wannabe said. At this point, I was getting beyond slightly annoyed. I grew up with a dad who constantly listened to singers like Marty Robbins and Conway Twitty, with a healthy dose of Alabama and Glenn Campbell thrown in as well. I worked in grocery stores where Johnny Cash and Ralph Stanley shopped. As a side note, Johnny Cash was cool. I won't say what I thought about Ralph. Back to the point, I knew country music. As much as I didn't want this guy to be singing to me while standing 1.5 feet from my face, I wasn't going to let him insult me. Besides, it was obvious he wasn't going anywhere until I requested something. "Can you do Waylon's Lukenbach, Texas?" I asked the old man, who was probably as old as the town the song is named after. He smiled as if he approved and then broke into the song. As weird as it was to have him serenade us while we ate pig testicles, he did a really good job, and just over 3 minutes later, he had finished and moved on to annoy a different table. We could finish eating these balls in peace. The rest of the meal was uneventful, other than somebody successfully finished their 72-ounce steak dinner. We finished our measly 16-ounce steaks and got back on the road. It was dark out now, but I could still drive for a few hours. I wanted to at least make it into New Mexico before we stopped for the night. There's a town named Tucumcari not far over the New Mexico border. In the heyday of Route 66, Tucumcari was a hot spot for travelers. Plenty of old motels, souvenir shops, and restaurants. The cool thing about Tucumcari is that it's holding on to that past. Many of the old diners are still open, serving a mix of Tex-Mex and burgers, while the old school motels are offering throwback rooms for a pretty decent price. I'm guessing Tucumcari must be popular, since most of the vintage motels are booked up for the night, but I did get lucky and find a room at one for just 40 freaking bucks. It was pretty late by the time we pulled into the hotel. There was a separate building for check-in. The door was locked, but I rang a doorbell, and a few moments later, some dude in a bathrobe came to let me in. He had a cigarette in his mouth, but at least it was unlit. I'm pretty sure I woke him up, but he was friendly enough. He got all my info before telling me the room number. These days, hotels usually give you a card to get in your room, but this place had real keys. I haven't had a hotel room with real keys in years. It felt charming, which would also be the best word to describe this room, the most PG word anyway. There were 2 beds, but only one was a real bed. Charlie took that one. I slept in a fold-up portable bed, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever slept on. There was an old window air conditioner that kept the room at a sultry 94 degrees. The window itself had a blanket in place of a curtain, but it worked well enough to keep the light out. There was also a small window in the bathroom. This one had no glass, just a screen and broken blinds. At least the air coming from this window felt better than what was coming from the air conditioner. I guess this is what you get for $40. As a plus, it's a break from watching the crack in the Jeep's windshield continue to grow, and I get a break from just looking at that freaking monstrosity of a wrecked Jeep outside anyway. We crawled out of bed early the next morning. I think Charlie slept okay. I slept as good as could be expected when spending the night in a bed left over from the Civil War. The room had cooled down a little bit overnight, but it was still way too warm for my taste. The shower worked well, so I can't complain about that. At least I could be feeling clean, even if I was also feeling like death. We got the Jeep loaded back up and hit the road. We were headed for the Grand Canyon, but still had a long way to go. Most of this day would just be driving and getting to Arizona. I'd kept noticing the crack in the windshield growing more and more. It had now spread the length of about half of the windshield. As I drove, I'd come up with a plan to get some super glue to cover the crack, hopefully stopping the spread, but at the very least maybe it would slow it down. We stopped to fill up and get a couple of gas station hot dogs. You know, the ones that are rolling behind glass but really out for anybody to touch and breathe on. Those can be a lifesaver when you're in the middle of nowhere and there's not even a McDonald's within 100 miles. I also picked up a tube of super glue, only it wasn't super glue. It was called super glue, but it was spelled SOOPERGLOO, super glue. I was desperate for something though, so this off-brand gas station junk would have to do the job. Before we got back on the interstate, I coated the crack in glue. It dripped down the windshield like slime. When I finished up, most of the bottom half of the windshield was covered in this stuff. I was hopeful that this crack had met its match. There was one thing I hadn't considered about the glue. Bugs. Frickin' bugs. 20 miles after leaving that last gas station, there were already a few dead bugs mashed into the super glue. 50 miles later and it was becoming kind of funny. By the time we'd gone 100 miles, the glue had become a graveyard with more dead bugs than I could count. There were plenty of dead flies and a gnat, a couple butterflies, countless fat bugs that had exploded in multiple shades of yellow and green. When I had to stop for gas again, I tried scraping them off, but they wouldn't budge. All these bugs were permanently decorating the Jeep now, but at least the crack hadn't grown anymore. The next several hours just consisted of driving, with an occasional stop for gas or just to get out and walk around for a minute. It was anything but boring though. The landscape had changed from dry, sandy field to red rocks and giant cacti. Arizona looked like another planet and I freaking loved it. I'd never seen anything like it before. Barring the fact that the Jeep looked like it'd been through war, this was becoming an awesome trip. Eventually we passed a series of abandoned stone buildings. There was an exit less than a mile later that read 2 guns, and since I didn't have any clue if it was safe, I figured we might as well stop. I've never been one to make great decisions. I would later learn that 2 Guns had been a popular tourist stop along Route 66 going all the way back to the 1920s. These days it was just a ghost town, but that's what attracted me to stop. This was the first time it had really paid off to be in this Jeep. If I'd had any other vehicle, I probably wouldn't have driven down the disappearing road to check out these buildings, but this thing was tailor-made for driving over rocks and broken roads. I took the Jeep as far as I could, but eventually the road disappeared completely over a mini canyon, so we had to get out and we explored on foot. There were several buildings that weren't much more than remnants at this point, but everything looked really freaking cool. One building originally housed a tiny roadside zoo. You can still make out letters spelling mountain lions painted on the front. Around back are broken pens where the mountain lions lived alongside Gila monsters and cougars, and this was almost 100 years ago. There were other buildings too, in varying states of decay, but none of this was like the abandoned houses I'm used to seeing back home in Virginia. The buildings here in Two Guns were made out of stone with wooden roofs. Most of the roofs were long gone while the walls still stood in place, but there were some that still had the roofs. I'm sure this place was bustling a few generations ago, but now there was nothing more than a few lizards sunning in the heat. The solitude made it feel even more like a postcard, but the heat made it feel like an oven. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it's okay just because it's a dry heat. Only idiots who haven't experienced it would say that. Two Guns has history going even further back than the 1920s. The Navajos murdered over 40 Apache here in the 1800s. The Apache were hiding from their enemy in a cave, but the Navajo found them. They lit fires at the entrance to the cave so they could smoke the Navajo out. Each one that ran out to escape the cave was shot and stripped of anything valuable. When Two Guns started attracting tourists, there were still Navajo bones in the cave. Most of the skulls ended up being sold as souvenirs. Once we'd explored all that remained of Two Guns, we headed back to the interstate. We weren't far now from the Grand Canyon, something I was really pumped to see. Clark Griswold stopped here on his way to Wally World, so it seemed fitting that we should make the stop too. The Grand Canyon may have only had a minute or so of screen time in Vacation, but it looked like it was worth seeing in person. The one thing I never expected about the Grand Canyon was that it's in the middle of a pine forest. Admittedly, my research on it had been from National Lampoon and Joe Dirt, but I was expecting more of the same desert we saw around Two Guns. I also expected waves of extreme heat, but that wasn't the case either. The temperature dropped quickly as we got closer to the Grand Canyon. It was probably 15, maybe 20 degrees cooler once we did get there. There was even a touch of snow here and there. The other thing I didn't expect was just how awesome the view was going to be. Pictures and movies don't do the place justice. It's indescribable. It doesn't look real, but it is so real it's right in freaking front of you, and it's everywhere. It looks like it goes on and on forever, with colors that you just don't expect to see. The sky seems infinite, but so does the scar left in the ground by the Colorado River. It's something that really should be seen by everyone before they die. The crowds were concentrated in the same areas, with most people staying pretty close to the visitor center. The views there are worth taking in, but the best views are just a few minutes further along the rim. There are spots where you can walk right over to the edge. No fence, no railings, nothing to hold you back from falling to your death. You could walk right up and jump over, completely alone. No one would suspect a thing. You'd just be gone. There's another reason to avoid the visitor center area at the Grand Canyon besides just the crowds. There's a dedicated spot near the parking lot for people to share their dumb ideas and protests. Somebody was handing out literature to join their cult while we were there. Surprisingly, they weren't getting any takers. It seems like more people are here to view the giant canyon than to read brochures from the smiling lady trying to get new recruits. Besides the cult recruitment center, everything about our stop at the Grand Canyon was great. Charlie did ask if he had to get out of the car when we first arrived, but I'm pretty sure he was impressed once he finally saw the canyon. It was too late in the day to make it anywhere else once we left the Grand Canyon, so we just headed an hour down to Williams, Arizona to stop for the night. We'd be getting up early and should finally cross over into California sometime tomorrow. We started early again. My brain hadn't adjusted to the time difference yet. It was 5 a.m. here, but 8 a.m. back home, so I was already up and ready for the day. Having the extra time helped convince me to take a detour off the interstate and drive through the Arizona mountains, following old Route 66 a little more closely. The highway got more and more narrow as it wound its way through the hills. I wasn't sure exactly what we would find, but I knew we were still headed west, so I kept following the signs telling us we were on the historic Mother Road. We rarely saw any other cars, but the scenery was some of the coolest I'd ever laid eyes on. The desert wasn't red anymore, it was darker brown with big gray boulders and short round bushes and donkeys. Yeah, that last one's kind of weird. I'm used to seeing wildlife back home. We've got deer and turkeys, even get a random armadillo sighting in Virginia these days. but I never considered donkeys to be something I'd pass while cruising the back roads. But that's exactly what we came across in Arizona. I pulled over to get a closer look, and before I knew it, one of them was staring straight into my driver's side window. Charlie had already hopped out of the Jeep to get a closer look. I figured I'd do the same. Found myself surrounded by these burros. They seemed okay to be petted, but they were a little pushy. I assumed they wanted food, but I didn't have anything to give them. I don't suppose donkeys want Slim Jims and Pop-Tarts. The fact that I wasn't holding any food didn't stop them from being so interested in us. I wouldn't have called them aggressive, but they were zealously friendly. I had to slowly step back and barely open the Jeep door to get back inside. They were standing so close that I couldn't make a big effort out of getting away. They were like the bums who stand outside the gas station. Once you make eye contact with those bums, it's too late. And it was also too late with these donkeys. The big one wasn't happy that I got back in my car without giving any handouts. He turned and kicked the side of the Jeep, and they all slowly trotted away. Now, there was a cracked windshield, a missing mirror, and a nice big dent. Nobody was going to believe a donkey did it. My hatred for this Jeep never ceased to grow. We got moving again, continuing westward on Route 66. We did pass more wild donkeys, but I wasn't dumb enough to stop for them anymore. We made it about 20 more miles and came to a little town called Oatman. It looked like it was straight out of the Old West, except there were cars parked all along the wooden sidewalks. If you took away the cars and the tourists, it would look like you walked straight into a movie set. Oh, and there were more of those wild donkeys here. The city donkeys seemed to be a little better about ignoring people. These donkeys probably got their handouts without trying so hard. They were just walking around living their best life and using the bathroom all over the place. You gotta watch where you're stepping in Oatman. 100 years ago, a couple of prospectors struck gold in Oatman, and it became a boomtown. There was a point in Oatman's history when it was the largest producer of gold in the American West. Those days are long gone. In this century, it survives on tourism. People come here now to see the donkeys and take in some Old West vibes. I'll admit, it is really cool and worth coming to visit. There's no doubt that it's a tourist trap. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. After leaving Oatman, we headed back to the interstate. I was determined to finally cross over into California today. Oatman wasn't far from the border, but I was getting anxious to make it across and start seeing some of the Golden State. So we left the donkeys and Arizona's Black Mountains behind for Southern California's oddities and ultimately Disneyland. Remember that movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure? When Pee-wee visits the giant dinosaurs in the desert? I found out it's a real place in California called the Cabazon Dinosaurs. There's a 65-foot tall T-Rex and a Brontosaurus that's 150 feet long. Together, they make up one of those stereotypical roadside attractions from the 1960s, and there was no way I was going to pass through the California desert without stopping to see them. We made it to Cabazon in the late afternoon. We were welcomed by desert, but also palm trees, which was different from the Arizona desert, and of course, the dinosaurs. Back when Pee-wee was here, there was a restaurant, the Wheel Inn Cafe. That's where Large Marge's ghost dropped Pee-wee off after telling him the story of the worst accident she had ever seen. Pee-wee realized he lost his wallet, so he ended up washing dishes to pay for his meal and then watched the sunrise from the mouth of the T-Rex. The Wheel Inn is long gone, but the dinosaurs remain, and so does Pee-wee, as the T-Rex is painted up to be wearing the iconic gray suit and red bow tie that Pee-wee made famous. Another great 80s movie visited the Cabazon Dinosaurs too. The Wizard was a Fred Savage movie revolving around Nintendo and Mario Bros. 3 that ended here at the dinosaurs. It was basically a giant commercial for Mario 3. They even came inside the Brontosaurus in that movie. You can still go inside these days too. It's a dinosaur-themed gift shop. Southern California turned out to be a paradise for 80s movie locations. Besides the Cabazon Dinosaurs, we stopped by the mall from Back to the Future. This is the spot where Doc first shows the DeLorean to Marty. The same location where Marty gets chased by the terrorists, getting the DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour and travels back to 1955. We also got to see the Santa Monica Pier This is where Chevy Chase is first confronted by Tim Matheson in Fletch, setting up the plot for the rest of that film. It's also the end of Route 66 after its beginning all the way back in Chicago. And finally, to cap off the first day in California, we went by Pee-wee's house from the same movie that shows off the Cabazon dinosaurs. It felt right to check it out after starting the day in Cabazon. These days, the house isn't decked out with all the crazy yard decorations that Pee-wee set up, but it's instantly recognizable as the house where he and that freaking bike live. After a long day of wild donkeys and 80s film locations, we ate dinner at McDonald's. I know, why come all the way to California just to eat at Mickey D's? Well, this is the oldest one that exists. It's basically a big burger stand with a mini museum attached. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to eat here and also see an original Mac Tonight costume from the 80s. All in all, it was an awesome first day in California. It's finally here. It's really been a full week. A full freaking week of watching the Jeep destroy itself all across America. A full week of seeing the landscape change from green to red to brown and back to green. We'd seen places that looked like movie sets, places that really were movie sets. We'd eaten lots of McNuggets, burgers, even some pig balls. All that was cool, but today was the day for Disneyland. At least for the next 14 hours or so, we're going to walk our feet off, ride everything we possibly can, and forget about that freaking Jeep. Tomorrow will be a new day, and I can start wondering if it will hold up on the trip back to Virginia. But for the next few days, the monorail waits.
kidding me.